Welcome to GS Podcast number 123. I'm Stephen Knight. Who the hell are you? Sorry, how the hell are you? Good? Good. I'm very pleased to have Seth Andrews on this episode. Many of you may already be familiar with Seth's work. He's the silky-voiced host of the Thinking Atheist. Been producing some quality content for a number of years now, so I really enjoyed finally getting him on the podcast. Seems strange that he's not been on already, actually. I think we've been trying to hash this out for a while. Covered a lot of interesting topics, from American nationalism to British insults to ghost stories to Mythcon as well, and the intellectual dark web. So I found this really interesting and really appreciated Seth taking the time to come on and speak his mind with me. Make sure you check out the Thinking Atheist podcast. You can also find Seth on Twitter at Seth Andrews TTA. So send him some love, send him some feedback, send him some kind words. My incredible supporters on Patreon would have had access to this episode slightly earlier than the standard release, as a small thank you for all your support. And I'll also be reading your names out at the end of the episode to say thank you as well. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/gspellchecker, and any support's greatly appreciated. You can keep up to date on the podcast at gspellchecker.com. Enjoy.
There's a word that some folks find real hard to spell. Ain't it horrible for me, except after seeing who cared to go burn in hell? But then along came a man, a spell checker from the God of creed, and he set out upon a noble quest to help those that don't know what it means. And he said, and go Atheist, and don't you put that I before that E. Atheist, don't mean we don't speak to double. And he keeps on out these godless say, a reason sharp as a knife will make him run away. But if they start that fight, well, they can go all day. Spell checker, easy, gotta spell check. Now you know how it goes, so sing along with me. Atheist,
It's a great pleasure to finally get Seth Andrews on the Godless Spell Checker podcast. Seth, welcome. How the hell are you?
It's like you exist in person. You know, I didn't think you were real. I didn't think you existed in nature. But yeah, it's a real joy to be able to talk to you, my friend.
Yeah, I have a crack shot team that work around the clock to send pithy tweets, essentially.
Is there any other kind?
Yeah, that's what it's for. Well, you know, I feel the vibe on Twitter's changed a little bit recently, actually, but maybe we can get into that in a little while. But what I really wanted to talk about to start with, which I found really interesting, is in contrast to what you spend your time doing now, that's not always what you did. That's not what your humble beginnings were all about, really. I believe you were quite the Christian back in the day, and I just wonder if you could let my listeners know a little bit about how religious you were.
Yeah, I was pretty hardcore. To give you some perspective, my parents met at the university that was founded by an evangelical faith-healing Christian. Wow. His name was Oral Roberts, and Oral Roberts University is still going strong, but it was founded back in the 60s by this tent revival preacher who claimed that he could genuinely call down God's power to heal people. And in my opinion, he was essentially just a charlatan. His son took over after his death, and the same kind of shenanigans ensued, and his son left the university in disgrace, and that's a long story. But they were hardcore and remain so today. They're both still alive. My mother wrote a Greek New Testament study guide, which was used at the college level. And so they were not Sunday Christians. They were, hardcore evangelical fundamentalists. The Bible is literally true Christians. And so you can imagine they wanted all their children to be baptized literally in every way in the faith. And so I was the product of Christian home, Christian prayers, Christian music. I went to Christian school for 8 years. I was a Christian radio host for 12 years. And I was, here in Oklahoma, which is part of the Bible Belt of the United States. I mean, my goodness, everybody here went to church or said they did. Everybody believed in Jesus or said they did. Everybody owned a Bible or said they did. And I was just all in. I just never knew any difference. To my knowledge, I hadn't met any atheists or didn't know who they were, didn't know how to approach the idea of non-belief. Even other religions, I really wasn't introduced to the world. I was raised in a tiny pod, this little cocoon. I mean, you should have seen my fourth grade Christian school, Stephen. It's like they ported people in from the 1950s, where all of our hair is slicked back and all the boys we're wearing little clip-on neckties that have American flags on them. And we're having to hold hand over heart and pledge our allegiance, not just to our country, but to the Christian flag, the Christian religion, to the Bible. We had to say a pledge to the Bible. To say we will be allegiant. And we were trained that we were going to grow up and retake our country for God, our specific God. And, that was kind of a hard thing to, when you realize that everything you once believed, everything you thought was true, everything you embraced with your whole life was actually a lie, a myth, a horribly bad idea. And you realize this in your 30s, and I did. I came kind of late to the party.
Wow.
It just caused quite a sea change in my own life.
Well, that's really interesting. I find that whole Christianity wrapped up with American nationalism really interesting, if not, terrifying at the same time. So, I mean, it's almost the inverse in the UK. We're ostensibly a Christian country. We have, a Christian monarch, and we have the Church of England. However, attitudes are pretty secular. We pretty much keep belief to ourselves for the most part. It's almost a bit weird if you're in the company of someone who seems overly religious. It stands out a bit. Whereas in America, you have the First Amendment, a sort of secular basis for the country, a secular constitution. Yet Christianity seems to be in the blood there. And I just wondered how America gets to a point where some Middle Eastern religion becomes kind of synonymous with American pie.
Well, it's an interesting thing to watch, too, on several levels. One is that the people here who embrace and espouse Christianity are alarmingly ignorant about their own religious history and Bible. It's like one of those support awareness ribbons that people will pin to their lapel for a specific cause. They don't know much about it, but they wear it on their outside, on their apparel, and it makes them feel good. This is how most Christians in this country wear Jesus. If you ask them specific scriptures, you talk about specific stories, especially some of the worst stories of the Old Testament. If you get into, when the Bible books were written and blah, 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 I mean, they just glaze over. They just turn into a pod person. They have no idea. Many of them have no idea how to respond. But they just know it's true. They go to Sunday church. They sing the songs. And then they live usually a very secular life. Right? I mean, these people, when they're in a car accident, they don't immediately drop to their knees and call down the healing power of their deity. Even though they believe God heals, they call 911 and they go to the hospital. They believe that God loves them and cares about them and protects them more than anyone else, but they lock their doors every night. And, we have over 300 million handguns in this country. Many, I think most, if not many, owned by religious people who are claiming God's divine protection. So that's weird, Why has it proliferated? It would take someone probably who's a better historian than I would. But I am struck by the amount of Christian privilege. Christians in this country are clueless about the idea that crossing the church-state line might in any way be damaging, might be unconstitutional, hell, might be anti-patriotic. To them, if we put a monument to the Ten Commandments on the Capitol grounds of Oklahoma State Capitol, and we had this happen. And there are protests that it belongs on private property, not on taxpayer-funded property. They just can't fathom it. Well, of course it belongs there. We're one nation under God, meaning my God. But when the Satanic Temple says, fine, we'll be right over. We're going to bring our Baphomet statue, and we Satanists are going to put up a temple. The Christians have a shit fit. They just lose their minds. And, they're absolutely clueless about how privileged they have been in this country. What's that line that says, when you're in a position of privilege, equality feels like oppression?
Yeah.
So now that they're being asked to share the table with other religions and the non-religious, equally, they claim oppression and persecution. I mean, if you want to see the persecution narrative, just watch Fox News in the U.S. It's 24/7, you know.
Yeah, they've had it good too long, haven't they?
Yep.
I wanted to get your opinion on the mega preacher. It seems like a very American thing, especially in sort of the English-speaking world. These huge Christian figures who can fill stadiums, and they have private jets and things like that. And I just wanted to get your take, having listened to what they come out with and how they operate, whether your gut feeling is that they are sincere in their devotion to this text and this ideology, or do you think they just know how to sort of monetize credulity?
Yeah. There's a great meme out there for the megachurch. It shows, I think, Joel Osteen's Lakewood Church. There's 10,000 people in the auditorium. And the meme caption says, if you have a prayer request, press 1. If you would like to fellowship, press 2. It's that kind of deal. It becomes very impersonal at that scale. Well, let me preface by saying that coming from the church, and this is something that many atheist activists get wrong, the idea that pastors as a whole are out to bilk people out of their money and to live tax-free lives, and they are all scam artists. Many of the people who are saying this don't have a history in the church and don't understand that most of the pastors in this country are not the megachurch pastors. They're very hardworking, good people who genuinely believe their Bible and want to be about helping people. They're on call 24 hours a day. They're making hospital visits, and they're doing charity work, and they're doing all these other things. I'm not saying I endorse the church, but we have to say that to say all pastors are scamming the public is unfair, because a great many of them, they work their asses off, they don't make a lot of money, and they are constantly at the beck and call of their congregations and community, genuinely believing they're doing the right thing. I do understand, though, that, I was talking on a podcast we just did about cults with a gentleman who went by the pseudonym Leon. He had escaped an oppressive cult, a high control cult, and he was talking about the sociopath, the person who is interested in money, sex, and power. And an amazing road to get those three things for the sociopath is his religion, is the church. I mean, imagine being able to say that God had prospered you, and God will prosper you if you will send in your tithes and offerings, cast your bread upon the water, and one day, maybe even in the next life, you will receive your bounty, your blessing. It will return to you 100-fold or whatever. Well, that's a pretty good scam. And so when I see somebody like Reverend or Pastor Joel Osteen in Texas living in a $10 million mansion with a $40 million net worth, when I see Jesse Duplantis asking his people to help him buy his, I think, fourth $50 million jet because he simply doesn't want to make layovers, because Jesus probably wouldn't want to take layovers, right? We do see Creflo Dollar and all of these mega pastors who are living lives that most of their constituents would never imagine. I'm highly suspicious that if they're not just mentally out there, if they haven't just lost it, that they are genuinely scam artists. And then people like Peter Popoff, he's the guy who was exposed in the 1980s using an earpiece.
Oh, yeah, was it James Randi?
Yeah, James Randi exposed him. His wife was in the back, and she was feeding him information about these audience members using prayer cards, and he passed it off as God miraculously giving him the info. Well, that guy's a total scam artist. He's selling miracle water and holy water and spring water and all that crap online. Jim Baker, have you seen him? He's selling those $175 buckets of French toast because the end times are coming and you need to be prepared. I'm convinced that people like him are scam artists. They are preying on the vulnerable. They're preying on those who are seeking hope. They're preying on people's fears. And we should call out and condemn them with the strongest possible voices.
Yeah, I think that's a good take. You touched on something very briefly there that's been giving me a lot of cause for thought lately. And when you spoke about religion kind of providing a community aspect or charity. And we both know that that gets a little bit sinister when it's intertwined with indoctrination. But sometimes you can just have fairly virtuous causes proposed by people of faith, and there doesn't seem to be a secular alternative to that. And there's a lot of people asking questions about identity nowadays. So what happens when we erode away this religious aspect of our society? What replaces it? What can we offer to fill that void? Because it kind of seems like if people don't need faith-based belief, they do need some sense of community, perhaps you could say purpose. And I just wanted to get your take on that, because we want, I think, more rational minds. I think I'd prefer more atheists if we're doing a net count of the number of atheists versus religious people. But are we leaving the ground open for more sinister ideologies to take center stage? Yeah, well, it's interesting. When I was in the church, we took like some mission trips to third world countries to help feed and provide shelter and basic necessities, and even some schooling resources, school supplies for young children. The work we were doing was essentially humanist work. Yeah. I mean, we had the window dressing of, well, God sent us, we are his hands, we are doing God's good work. But there's nothing about that you could not do without the religious backstory. And it's interesting because, we as atheists sometimes we surrender to the church ground that belongs to human beings in the first place. The church says that it claims ownership on all the good stuff in life. Love, that's the church. Well, no, that's actually a human thing. Charity and community and communal music and, helping other people and laughter and goodness and purpose and joy and meaning and all these things, the church says we own that. And whenever we, as atheists or humanists, say, whenever we get together as a group to enjoy time together or sing songs together or participate together in a charitable act for another person or have a convention or whatever, that we are simply acting like the church, we just surrendered to the church something that does not belong to the church. They do it extremely well. But this is not a religious thing. It's a human thing. And it's when we ask people to leave their faith, which is, we're saying not just reject this bad idea, reject the scriptures, reject the fundament, reject the bigotry, whatever. We're saying, I would like you to walk away from your support mechanism and the Sundays where you are greeted at the door by people who love you and hug you and know your name and make you coffee and will arrive at your house if they ever felt you had a need and visit you in the hospital and help you financially. We're asking you to leave a culture that has filled your heart in so many ways on so many occasions. We're asking people to leave their entire support structure. Is it any wonder that so many people find it so hard to extricate themselves emotionally even after they've extricated themselves logically from religion? And so I'd like to see us as atheists do a better job of being human beings and to see us stop apologizing for being human beings who many times do want to gather and do want to create support mechanisms and structures. We have a long way to go to create the kind of infrastructure that might ever replace the church, but I think it's a worthy goal. I mean, we can be charitable and we can be humanists. We can promote joy and meaning and purpose and goodness, and we can do so on the foundation of science, reason, and the evidence, and we can do so proudly without having to sort of blush and apologize to the church for stealing their idea. It is not the church's idea. So that's my take on it anyway. Yeah, I mean, I just wonder what could arise in terms of something to bind atheists and secularists together that wouldn't, I suppose, become a religion in its own sense. And I tend to find that, there's that expression, it's like herding cats. And I find that especially true of atheists. We're all very kind of independent and quick to draw lines, I think, which might bring me on to my next topic, which I know you've spent a lot of time thinking on and talking about. And it's this idea of how we approach a conversation now, how we deal with people in terms of trying to bring them to a more reasonable place or trying to understand them better or get them to understand you better. I know the the word civility has been thrown around quite a bit in the States at the minute. And I just wanted to get your take, because this is something I'm constantly in conflict with. I'll try my best to be the Socratic, open, empathy kind of guy. And I tend to find that I am more successful at that in person. Because that's generally my attitude and personality. I think once you get a screen in front of your face or a keyboard perhaps, it's almost easier to regress into something else. And I just wanted to get your take on this whole civility versus sort of firebrand atheism aspect.
Yeah. Well, speaking to the would atheism then sort of become a religion? I was thinking about that. Atheism being the descriptor of only what I don't believe in. I don't think, we can, I think there's a lot of merit in coming together as critics of religion and, I've got a community. The Thinking Atheist is a community. It is not a person. So, I'm very much understand that we come together as rejectors of religion. But I think we'll have more success in bringing about positive change in this world if the organizations of our future are really rallying more around a humanist banner, which that's about what I do believe in and what I am about. It is difficult, though, in the Twitterverse. I find that there is almost a gleeful tendency to misunderstand and or misrepresent. I saw somebody post something online. It was months ago, but I hadn't forgotten it. And he said, we judge others by their actions, but we judge ourselves by our intentions. And I think that's often true. We'll be a lot more forgiving for our own clumsy moments or misstatements or, the times when we weren't understood the first time and we're trying to go back and flesh it out. But heaven forbid somebody else make a mistake or be poorly understood in the Twitterverse, because people are waiting with pitchforks to vilify and shout and froth and carry on. I had mentioned in a radio show a few weeks ago that, in this hyper-connected world, it seems we as human beings are more disconnected than ever. I find it in my own life, where you stop seeing the human being, realizing there's a flesh and blood person with a life, with a past, with hopes, with dreams, with a personality, for good or for ill. And instead, you start trying to win against this avatar.
Yeah.
And everybody's watching, and they're going to see whether or not I win or lose. So I got to make sure I'm going to win. So I'll look smarter by making them look stupid. And I'll look good by making them look evil. I can be the hero if they are the villain, kind of a thing. And then before you know it, we take it from Twitter, and then I leave Twitter and make a blog about my tweet, and then I do a podcast about the blog, and then I make a video about the podcast, and then all of my followers do the same. And it just becomes this big noise. And I find it exasperating. Sometimes I just find myself switching off, just walk away. It seems almost futile. Do you ever feel that kind of frustration? I know you're on Twitter and on social media, Stephen.
Yeah, I think so. And I think I've, over the years, tried to take a more sensible approach to it. I think one of the things that has forced me to reconsider it is just time management. You realise you've been slinging mud at an egg for an hour, and neither of you are feeling particularly good about it. And these books I could be reading, these music I could be listening to, I could be going for a jog, I could be bettering myself or helping other people, and I'm fixated on a screen. So quite some time ago, I decided that I'd start imposing rules about engaging with people depending on how they approach you, I suppose. So yeah, I think it's kind of a consequence of the internet, isn't it? We all want to, make, like you just beautifully put there, we want to win an argument. We want it to be seen to be the good guy, and it's not helping, because it is kind of, like you say, it does spill out into bigger things, doesn't it? You have the tweet, then you have the blog, then there's the video, and then there's, and when it happens with public figures as well, you just feel that so much drama can occur and so much ill feeling can arise out of something that would never have happened if the same conversation had taken place in person.
I think there's kind of and this is going to be difficult. I need to make sure I phrase this correctly, but when you have a larger audience, let's say that, there's someone out there like Sam Harris or someone who has a large audience, there is a tactic, a strategy by some who are seeking the spotlight. So rather than go out and and create content of their own and sort of build a foundation of their own and an audience of their own, what they will do is they will go and they will sort of latch themselves, claw at the coattails of someone who's much more famous, much more well-known. And if they can be enough of a pain in the ass, and if they can say enough inflammatory things that they can get that person to stop what they are doing and respond, it's extremely validating. And it's then fuels, it just provides this sort of oxygen to the person who's sort of hanging on the coattail. And I'm saying that everybody who's ever criticized a public figure is that. And that's not at all my point. I know the knee-jerkers are going to go there. But there are some people who it seems to be a tarring and feathering for sport. And it's even a business model for some people, I think. You go out, you raise a big stink in regard to a known quantity, a popular name, a quote-unquote celebrity of some stripe. And the minute they turn around to look at you, the spotlight spills on you. Now you've built your own brand based on their reputation and efforts. And a lot of people do that. And, it's a cost-benefit discussion every time. Like, how long do you let this go? How should you, we should be able to call out bad ideas. At the same time, I don't want to fuel.
At what point does it become unhealthy?
At what point am I actually helping this person build their brand based on?
Well, that's a great point, because I'm by no means any stretch of the imagination a celebrity, but I have a sizable audience, and people have put blogs out about things I've said, and I've been reading them thinking that's absolute nonsense, I need to correct this immediately. Then I look at it and think, well, I'm just going to amplify this to a position, just to respond to it. I'll be then amplifying it to a position it would never have attained on its own. So half the time now, unless it's like a really big sort of spotlight on me for something, I just tend to ignore it and let it die, in its own self-pity, if that makes sense.
I mean, sometimes in the grander stage, it does help to ridicule the ridiculous. Like sometimes these people can help us draw a flashing red circle around something that needs to be addressed in a bigger context. So I'm not saying we don't ever stop, because sometimes it is helpful. Sometimes the best thing you can do to bad ideas and people is to actually, put the light on them for a second, and they'll do all the self-canceling for you, But it is amazing to me how much there seems to be a vilification. If you're not 100% with them, you are zero. What is that? Someone sent me, it's a fake book. It looks like a children's book, and it says, everyone who disagrees with me is a Nazi. I just laughed out loud, because I'm like, that's how so many people operate. If you're not on my side 100%, if you're only 95, you're a Nazi, that kind of thing.
Where I think that comes from a little bit, and I'll get your opinion on it as well, but I think a lot of people wed a lot of their political viewpoints to their self-worth as well. So they believe in being pro-choice or pro-LGBT, not necessarily because I'm sure they believe in it because it's the right thing to be, but they also think that it makes them a good person at the same time. So when they see different opinions, not necessarily in the realm of those two things, but they tend to see them as personal attacks, I find. And I was just wondering, do you have any political viewpoints or any alignments to any belief that you would feel personally aggrieved with if somebody was critical of it? Not you personally, but just a sort of political view or a human rights viewpoint.
Is there, let me make sure I understand your question. Is there an assertion someone might make about me politically that I would grieve about?
Not you specifically, so not Seth Andrews, but say if you strongly believe in a certain political viewpoint or a certain policy or a certain human rights view, and somebody is critical of that thing, would that be enough to make you angry or feel personally aggrieved?
I've come to the point where I have strong opinions. I mean, I take it in the teeth from time to time from a very few conservative, and I think conservative means something different here in the States.
Yeah, your conservatives are scarier, I have to say. Yeah,
in regard to Donald Trump, I despise very few people in this world, but he represents everything I am against. I'm shocked and astounded at the culture that I live in, and I grieve about the future. And so, people will come and they will they'll disagree with me about my liberal or left viewpoints, or they'll there are some pro or anti-abortion atheists who will come and they'll plead their case. But the truth is, at no point do I feel like because we disagree that you are now a villain or you are my enemy.
Yeah.
There are, there are some awful people out there, and I'm willing to say they're awful people, but how many times have we missed an opportunity to share a space with somebody who might have a passionate disagreement with us? And instead of working to connect as human beings and have discourse and change minds, we just shut down, declare them the enemy, and walk away, and then tweet about them 20 minutes later,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because there was a new friend of the family came around to mine on just to watch the World Cup game. We had a big garden party to watch the England game, which we won't talk about because I'm still a bit sore. But she was quite apprehensive because she's a Catholic and she's fairly devoted. She's a regular church goer, and I think she'd been told by my family what I spend my time doing, and I think she expected to be rounded on or attacked, or thought I'd be unpleasant towards her. And I was just asking her lots of questions about it, and interested in it, and not attacking and not being critical. And I feel like that's more productive in a sense than just going straight for the why do you believe that? That's a bit silly, that's a bit crazy. What I did do, which I think is very smart on my part, is I left her I let her leave with a copy of Chris Matheson's The Story of God. So I think
we'll see how that works.
We'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's probably better to hand her a little, an amazing comedy on the issue rather than say Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion or something like that.
It was Paul Ryan. I'm sorry, Paul Ryan. Ryan Cragen is a sociology professor at the University of Tampa in Florida in the United States, and he's done a lot of work about the best way to change minds. And one of the best ways was not fighting on Twitter, certainly, or even debating one-on-one over coffee. It was just changing social circles. And a great example is there's a couple that Natalie and I know. And by the way, Natalie's not an atheist, and some people wonder how that works. But
is this your partner, wife?
Yes, she's my wife.
Your wife, okay.
She's my wife. Been married almost 4 years, and we've been together much, much longer. And she's very supportive of me, but she's not an atheist. But we play tennis with a couple, and they knew us as tennis friends before they ever found out what I do for a living. I mean, it's a weird discussion to have. What do you do for a living? Well, I host one of the most popular atheist radio podcasts in the world. And you can just see they sort of turn their head like a cocker spaniel, like, like they don't know what to do with that information. But if I had told them on day one, hi, I'm an atheist activist, before we'd ever spend any time together, they would have seen only my label and they would have shut down. But because we became friends and our social circles intertwined, we got to know each other as human beings. After they found out I was an atheist a few weeks later, they found it much more difficult to throw me inside a little box and to discount me as a bad person.
Oh, okay.
Because they knew I was not. And before you know it, they're asking to read my book and they're wanting to have conversations, and they're still religious, but we're religious and still hang out. And I think one of the best ways to change the culture is to treat each other like human beings first, as often as we can,
Well, we touched on that big orange buffoon moments ago, and I mean, I'm still in shock that he is the president.
I must say, Stephen, the protest signs from London are some of the funniest things I have seen. And it actually went off, not to derail you here, but I went off on I've been learning how to do insults as the British might, and I'm horrible at it because I don't know what any of the words mean, but I've been reading these things like dodgy tosser and what's a plonker?
That's just an idiot. A dodgy tosser would be an untrustworthy masturbator, I suppose, in the parlance of our times.
Good to know. Words like wank puffin. Why are we not using wank puffin in the United States of America? What a great word.
I've noticed.
So anyway.
We've started becoming more Americanized. I had to tell my niece off for saying elevator the other day, and I'm like,
elevator?
I'm like, it's a lift. It's a lift. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
But no, if you ever need, I can provide you a handy list of Anglo insults any day of the week, Seth. I'm more than happy to provide that service.
Have your people call my people, and we'll exchange
We'll
lists.
set something
That'd
up.
be great.
But I mean, you touch on a point there with Trump and the protest signs, and I feel like his election, not only is it an awful thing, which I'll say until the cows come home, but I think the discourse behind it's not been great either. And I mean, by that I mean it's consumed everything. It's made everyone angry. Everyone's got an opinion on it. You can't do anything without Trump somehow bleeding into it. We're in the UK, and you saw what our streets were like this weekend in response to his visit. And I'm a bit worried that this seems to be almost an amplification of the kind of thing that put him in power in the first place, or certainly helped, should I say. It's definitely a small aspect of it. And I kind of keep asking this question now, and I'd like to get your view on it, that what needs to happen to make sure that man doesn't get back in 2020? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like it's a distinct possibility, even likelihood at this point.
Well, I think, my country's going to have to wake up and realize that he is, in fact, a wank puffin. I think that's the first thing we're going to have to do as a culture. It's an indictment of us as a nation. Not that he won the electoral vote and sort of eked into office. The fact that he received as much support as he did and continues to enjoy the poll ratings that he has now among the Republican Party is an indictment of us as a nation. And I'm thankful for those who are, enjoying and promoting the constitutional right of protest here in the United States. And I'm so thankful for those who protested in London and who protested in Scotland and all around the world, because protest is the response. This, again, speaks to speech. And this is another hot button topic that occasionally I get hot water in, because when I say speech, other people hear deference and weakness and acquiescence. And I think, no, I think we need to go out and strongly heard, let our faces be seen, let our messages be broadcast, that this man does not represent who we are. And I say that to anybody I meet who is not an American. I'm like, I want you to know that this man does not represent the goodness that is in this country, and he doesn't represent my value system and the value system of so many people that I know and love. We're just as concerned as you are, and we're desperate to try to fix this. I want to reassure people that not the whole country has not lost its mind, but it looks like half of it actually has. It's terrifying, Stephen. And to say, my parents are both almost Quaker-like in their fundamentalist religious belief. They're Puritan when it comes to sex, when it comes to drugs, when it comes to everything. They are so unbelievably conservative in their lives. And yet they love Donald Trump. They love a serial liar, a serial philanderer, the man who is the antithesis of the best verses of the Bible. When Jesus talks about turning the other cheek, it was Donald Trump who said, get even. He actually said this on stage. He said, when someone wrongs you, get even, get revenge. Pride goes before the fall in the Bible. We must be humble. We're commanded to be. And yet Donald Trump is the antithesis of that. Lust of the flesh, don't even get me started on Donald Trump. He is everything that they're supposed to hate, and yet they adore the man. And I think this country has lost its mind. And I can't decide if they're just so happy that they're finally back in power, or if even more alarmingly, that maybe somehow his bigotry and small-mindedness actually does reflect the values that they hold, or maybe both.
It's a conundrum. And I appreciate that people have the right to congregate and protest. I'm just not sure what that served in the UK that weekend. It seemed very. They don't seem to know what they want. What are they asking for? Is it just a show of unity? Because that's all well and good, but it's not. Doesn't seem like it's going to affect anything. It seemed like it was very. They were having fun, from what I could tell, but I just couldn't. I couldn't see what the point was.
As an American, I would have been alarmed had I seen the red carpet roll out and everyone embraced him with open arms. It helps me actually to know that the rest of the world is saying the same thing that many of us, especially here on the left, are saying in the United States, and is that we reject what this man represents. And I think that public statement is important. Now, we can argue that, will anything change? Certainly his poll numbers aren't going to change, but it's still a statement I think that needs to be made.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, it gave me a chance to learn some British insults that I can now integrate into the rest of my life. That's an sort of a
excellent. So yes, there's silver lining there, I suppose.
Yeah.
I wanted to move back a little bit to the atheist community now, because we seem to see an interesting branching out. You look at some of the prominent figures within the the sort of quote unquote atheist movement, and I suppose Sam Harris definitely falls into that category as one of the horsemen. He seems to be branching out into bigger topics now. There seems to be an appetite in the skeptic / atheist movement for people to cover more diverse things, politics, social justice, things like that. And I just wanted to get your viewpoint on that in terms of looking further afield. Is that something that you personally enjoy? I mean, do you think there is scope for that within the atheist movement to be like atheism and something else? I realise I'm getting into very dodgy atheism plus territory here. But I mean, there seems to be a bigger appetite for more than just God doesn't exist and here's why. People seem to want a bit more now from the skeptic circles that they move in.
There was people have asked me about, whenever I talk about I'm a proponent of social justice issues. But when I say that, immediately I am now linked with every extreme SJW, social justice warrior, who's ever done anything untoward or said anything just batshit crazy out there, And that's why it's so difficult to have a nuanced conversation like you and I are having now in the age of, the YouTube and the social media universe. Is people will hear one thing and immediately just stop listening to everything else. Well, I'm an atheist, which means I reject religious claims. And much of what we find relating to inequality and bigotry and racism and all of these other issues, a lot of that is directly tied to our religious past and religious operations within religious thinking, religious cultures. I think because I'm an atheist, but more importantly, I'm a humanist, I want to care about my fellow human being. And that means making the world a better place. And beyond all that, Stephen, I'll just be honest, I've been doing this since 2009, but on the radio since 2010, and I still love it. I love it. I mean, it's in my DNA. I'm privileged and honored to be able to do what I do. I hope I'm doing it for a long, long time. But you can only say there is no evidence for any gods anywhere. You can only say that so many times.
Yeah.
You can only cover the religions. You can only cover the cult. You can only do religious history. You can only do all these specific topics so many times. And you find yourself aching to reach out, to branch out, to talk about the greater human condition. And it becomes this dividing line where some people say, well, this is not why I subscribed to your channel. And I'm like, well,
stay in your lane.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, if you don't want to hear me dog on Trump, I get that. But there are so many options out there. What are you doing here? Yeah. It's my channel. I mean, obviously, I want to serve the audience, but at the same time, I also wanted to reflect my attitudes and values. And even I get bored talking about the Bible. Let's talk about other stuff. Hell, we'll do an off-topic podcast about just dumb stuff. Hey, is it really better to put premium unleaded gasoline in your car instead of regular unleaded? Well, let's do a scientific test and let's find it, because even I want to talk about other things. I am about to release to audible.com an audiobook of ghost stories because I'm a fan of supernatural fiction, even though I don't believe in the supernatural. I love ghost stories. And it's just been a side project I've been nibbling on for the past 6 months because even I need something else. And I think it's, we as human beings should be able to talk about the stuff that matters. And if it's not represented by the title of my channel, so what? And if people don't like what they hear or see, they have options. They can just go and click on a video that does speak to them in a more relevant way. Yeah,
that's a great answer. I'm very surprised and pleased to hear that you're branching out into sort of ghost stories on Audible, did you say? I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, I love a good ghost story, and I don't think my atheism or my disbelief in the supernatural takes away from my experience. You're like, people often say to me, well, how can you enjoy horror and ghost story if you don't believe in these kind of things? And I'm like, well, I don't believe in the Force, but Star Wars is great.
That's the exact example I use. It's like that and Harry Potter. I don't believe in Lord Voldemort, but I love Harry Potter. And I think the cultivation of imagination is part of the human experience. And every October, we do an annual Ghost Stories broadcast. Totally off topic. We're just having fun. And it has become a favorite among our audience. And there are always a few naysayers who are like, this isn't why I subscribe to the channel. You know what I'm saying? We could have done anything, and I think those people would bitch and moan. Not just bitch. They would bitch and moan about what we were doing. But sometimes you got to just be you, let your hair down, distract yourself, and that gives you some oxygen to be able to sort of reset and get back into the game on the serious subjects later on.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just want to say at this point, if you can hear some loud rain-like noise in the background, it's because there's some loud rain in the background. And
I barely hear it.
It should come out in the edit. But, I mean, that's really interesting about the ghost stories. And what's funny about that is whenever I go and visit some sort of old, medieval town in England, like York in the north of England, or up in Edinburgh in Scotland, usually the best way to see some of the city's history on a guided tour is to take the ghost walks. And they often take you to little nooks and crannies in the city, or in basements or underground caverns that you don't get to see unless you sign up for the ghost talk. So you have to put up with the guide talking about, and this is where she lost her head, and some say they can still hear her every Thursday. Oh, it's Thursday now, kind of thing. You have to put up with that crap, but you get to see these wonderful, wonderful locations. So yeah, this whole not having an imagination thing or being quite cynical thing of atheists is typically not true, is it? I mean, I think we only have a problem. I mean, I think we think that, maybe the supernatural and the magical and the fantastical should go be in fiction, and that's where it should stay. I think that's the only contention. Yeah,
I'm not a Vulcan. I mean, I really do enjoy being able to. I'll go and we saw a terrific movie called A Quiet Place, which, you go in and you just sort of surrender. You take the journey. It's like going on a carnival ride. And when you're over, you put your feet back on solid ground. Everybody high fives, big smile, and you get on with the rest of your day. It's funny, here in the United States, there's a show. It's awful. It's called Ghost Adventures. And they have found like the 3 dumbest guys on the planet who go into these supposedly haunted locations with scanning equipment. And you've seen them, everything from the dowsing rods to the meters that can measure temperature and all these things. And, they're like, oh, look, there's a flying orb that has changed direction on camera. This is proof of the supernatural. And of course, those of us who know anything about video are like, if you can't recognize a particle of dust in your lens, you have no business being on international television. I don't find those kinds of things compelling. But if you were to ask me to stay the night in a haunted castle, just for the hell of it, just for fun, I think it'd be great fun. I think it'd be, even if you end up spooking yourself, it'd be a story, it'd be an experience. I read an article a long time ago that said that many of the happiest people, who they spend their time and money and resources not on things, but they spend them on experiences. Yeah. And those people tend to be largely happier and more fulfilled in their life. And I don't know if it's true for everybody else, but it's certainly been true for me. I want to live my life accumulating experiences and things that, whenever Natalie and I, whoever talk about them, that we can smile and share those moments, in memory forever. And so that would be a great memory, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty much how I tend to look at it. I'm always trying to travel or seek out something new, and it's very difficult to find a weekend when something's not booked in, but it has the sort of negative effect of making time speed up. I don't know if you've noticed, once you try and go on little adventures and new experiences, you tend to find that time before you know it, it's like you're 65 and you can't chew things anymore. And it seems to just crept up on you.
I found time goes faster as I get older.
Yeah.
When I was 21 and you told me something was going to happen in a year, I was just aghast. I'm like, a year? And I can't believe it's already almost the month of August. I'm 50 years old and time is just flying by. And they say this is a phenomenon as you age. All of a sudden you look around and go, hey, how did I get to be 50 years old? So carpe diem, seize the day.
I wasted so much time in my 20s. I wish I could just visit myself and shake him by the neck
You survived. You're not in jail.
Yeah.
And you're still breathing. You did okay.
Always
you
positive.
survived.
Quick change of focus then. I suppose it'd be worth talking about Mythcon a little bit, because this is a conference you were invited to last year and dropped out, so we can get into that. I'm going there in a couple of months as well. And I think we've both had fairly different experiences in regards to the organisation there. And when you dropped out, it seemed to be in relation to the whole media circus surrounding it. There was a lot of extreme views, but there was a lot of genuine problems you felt with a few guest choices. And I think to the outside observer, me included, until we've spoke about it a little bit, it seemed like you almost left because of the pressure of the mob there trying to tell you it was an awful neo-Nazi rally type thing. And I just thought I'd give you an opportunity to talk about your experience of it and what led you to disinviting yourself in a way, because I think since you've said maybe you feel that was a regretful decision. I'm not sure if I've got that right.
I was talking, I'm happy to talk about it. I was speaking. I was in New York for an event, and my buddy Faisal Saeed Al-Muhtar was there, and
yeah,
we
a
were
good guy, Faisal.
Somehow, yeah, he's doing such amazing work with Ideas Beyond Borders, and I trust him. He's a smart guy. We've been friends for years, and he was like, why didn't you go? And the reason that I decided to opt out, and it's something I still don't know if it was the right decision, and I'm sure my critics are going to crucify me for saying that, because the last thing you should ever be is unsure.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why I'm unsure in just a second. But I dropped out because I lost faith that the organizers really knew what they were doing. When I saw the circus around it, which, much of it was out of their control, but, Sargon of Akkad is someone I consider to be just a reprehensible person. And I think there were so many other more worthy voices, and to see the defenses of the invitation and to see just the circus that had become this conference. I'd never seen anything like it. And I told Natalie, I'm like, this is not why I do events. I mean, I go to have community and to share ideas. And this is just this is just romper room. This is crazy. And there was so much noise, white noise around it, that I finally just pulled the plug. And of course, I got crucified for saying, I'm opting out. Those who wanted me to speak said that I should have gone and made my case and spoke to my own values. And if I had criticisms, I should have voiced those criticisms. I think Faisal was essentially along those lines. He's like, you should have gone and you should have, taken the microphone. And those people may well be right. And other people said, I'm a coward. And yet others said that I was... I backed out only when I had no other choice. So I must be complicit or weak. I mean, you name it. Every pejorative in the book was coming out. And it was, it's interesting how one event was then used to sort of paint the entire movement. I think to myself, of all the organizations, of all the different local, regional, and national conferences, of all the activism work that's doing by all the wonderful people, there's a group of folks, Stephen, who begin to talk about atheism with a capital A, or the atheist movement, and good luck defining that.
Yeah.
As if Mythcon was an echo of everything else that was going on. This was a symptom of, this is proof that the patient is dying of cancer, and all of movement atheism is infected with, they're all essentially in bed with Sargon of Akkad. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
But I mean, on the flip side of it, do you not think that maybe as well, boiling down that entire lineup of guests to Sargon is almost similar in that aspect? I mean, the conference was much more than this one guy. And I come in and out of, I don't really know Sargon's content too well. I don't really follow his stuff. I wasn't a fan. I've met him in person, and he's perfectly pleasant. But he does command a very large audience, and it seems difficult to ignore. It kind of seems it makes sense to have someone like him at a conference. And I just thought maybe this one aspect was, why was this one aspect so much of a sticking point for you?
Well, I think, it speaks to values. There are people who can hold a specific point of view, and I can disagree with that point of view, and we can hash it out on stage. And I support that. If someone had asked me, would you ever take the stage? People will put these kind of purity tests in front of you. Would you ever take the stage with person X? And if you say yes, meaning that you would engage. And engagement is not endorsement, as we've said before. But if I was to engage, well, then I am platforming and in a way enabling and complicit in promoting their message. And I am now part of the problem and the enemy and maybe even a Nazi. I mean, this is just kind of where everybody goes. And this would normally be the case with Sargon of Akkad or someone like him who I thought was operating with bad ideas. But I came away really more than anything else with the impression that Sargon was not a good faith operator, but was there in a win-win situation because Mythcon essentially amplifies his megaphone, and he can either play that he's been validated because he was part of the lineup, or if things go south, he can call himself a martyr because the movement doesn't understand him. And after seeing how poorly he had been operating, with in regard to the rape-related taunts on Twitter and else, I just think he's not the person I would invite. Now, I've said publicly, Mythcon has the right to invite anybody they want, and this is a sticking point for me. Mythcon's organizers have the right to invite whoever they want, and they have the right to do so without threats and without these tremendously shady tactics that were going on where people are calling the hotel and warning the staff about potential violence, and everybody who's associated, everybody on stage being complicit or called a Nazi or white supremacist, all that nonsense. It's just so wrong-headed, intellectually dishonest. It's unhelpful. It's just wrong.
Yeah.
And I, at the same time, can say, I think this is a stupid idea. I think if you're going to have somebody who is, I don't know, whatever his positions or platforms, let's say he's a critic of feminism. Well, there are people who are critics of feminism or the label feminism who can argue that, but they don't bring his level of toxicity rather to the stage. And I think in his case, I just felt like he benefited from the oxygen that he was given. And I just found it tragic that we would give it to him. Certainly Mythcon has the right to do so. Yeah. But then I have the right to say, I'd rather not go. I'd rather not be a part of that mechanism.
I think that's entirely possible. But I mean, I also have a sneaky suspicion maybe he gave Mythcon some oxygen in terms of coverage and amplification, because it's difficult to kind of, I mean, in terms of the views he gets on YouTube. But when I've seen him I saw him at an event in London I was down to cover, and he's like a celebrity, basically. Everyone was coming up to him every 2 minutes. He seems to command a large audience, quite a lot of influence, and it's difficult to know how to deal with that issue. Do we say you're persona non grata and let him carry on what he's doing, or do we bring him to a stage and openly challenge him? I mean, to Mythcon's credit, I think they did attempt that with Thomas Smith. I just think Thomas Smith did a pretty appalling job, if I'm being honest about it. And I just wonder what's the antidote to somebody like that, whose views you find risible, yet he commands quite a lot of influence.
If someone from Westboro Baptist Church said, all right, we would like to debate with Seth Andrews about our religion, and I was to say yes, and I very well might, right? We all know what Westboro's position is and whatnot. But sometimes I think, the best thing you can do for bad ideas is to give them the light of day. Sometimes you can. The difference is that Sargon is operating to a degree under an atheist activist banner, meaning that I, in some way, am sort of validating him as an atheist activist by sort of positioning him. It's not like I brought in somebody from another religion, or I brought in somebody who was a devout Christian we were going to debate, or somebody like that. I mean, this guy claims to be a member of my team to a degree. And I find that becomes really problematic. And as a humanist, I think I don't want to fuel the engine of somebody who is using rape-related language to try to prove a point out there. I'm a communicator. I'm a professional communicator. I know how language works. It was unnecessary unless you are in the business of sort of clickbait, of recreational outrage, or a business level of outrage. You create outrage out there. You create drama and chaos, and then you watch the clicks come in.
Yeah. And
I'm just not a fan. Now, if I had to go back and do it again, there were a couple of things I would do differently. I might actually go. I would be in the unenviable position where I would have to take the stage to criticize the organizers of the event I was speaking at. But I think I would do so. I think I wouldn't have canceled, and I would probably go, and for the record, on video, probably on the internet, I think all the speeches are live, I would have stuck to my commitment, and I would have made good for those who bought tickets, who were expecting me to be there, and I would have followed through on that and just said what was on my mind and heart from the stage. I think that might have been a better decision.
Yeah, I think the organizers would have been, I think they would have been okay with that as well.
Yeah, it's very possible that that might have been the better move. And I'm not Yoda. I was in the middle of a tremendously difficult time. I'd never been in a situation like this. I genuinely did want to do the right thing, whatever it was. And in retrospect, I look back and I still wonder, what should I have done? All I can do is learn from it. The second thing I regret is that I was pretty hard on, and it was my fault. I sort of made them guilty by association, and I shouldn't have associated them. But Shiwan Head and Armored Skeptic were also on the lineup, and for some reason I had sort of created. They're often, I think, critical of feminists and feminism, and I think what they're critical of are some of the more extreme feminists and feminism. And I had sort of placed them alongside Sargon, and I really am sorry about that. It was something that I should have gotten right and did not. And so I gave them kind of a hard time on Twitter at the time. I was caught up in the moment, and they genuinely deserved better than that. I think from what I understand, Armored Skeptic does a lot of great work. I don't know much about Shiwan Head, but I'd like to have handled that better. And, if they're listening, and I'll send them a personal message. I'd like to apologize because I could have been better in that respect.
Oh, I think that's really, really nice of you. It says a lot about your character that you can say something like that. But I think it is tremendously unfair of people to have been sort of labeling you a coward. I mean, it is a no when something is all that controversy around an event. It is a no-win situation. If you go, you're the guy who went to the Nazi conference. If you don't go, you're the coward who wouldn't stand up for your principles. And I think these people just create these extremes that are really unhelpful for I mean, it goes back to our public discourse conversation we had, I suppose, doesn't it? But I mean, we touched on something a little bit there about atheism and people. You said you were, a secularist and a humanist, and as an atheist activist, you're almost vouching for the people you're on stage with. And I thought, I mean, is there an issue in terms of lack of political diversity within the atheism movement? We seem, I mean, I'm a left-leaning liberal, and I only ever seem to meet left-leaning liberals when I go to these conferences, which is fine because these are my team. But would we benefit from a few more conservative atheists in our midst?
Yeah, I don't know. The thing is that I used to be that guy. Right. I was a Fox News Christian, Stephen. I was pro-death penalty. I was anti-abortion. I was anti-drugs. I was, anti-big government. I was, one of those guys who I just was all the talking points of what is sort of the Trump conservative party. And it was when I left religion that I started to re-examine the things that I used to believe. And I realized how much of what I used to believe was informed by my faith and culture. So it was like, well, the death penalty used to be, if you kill somebody, we'll kill you back. It's Old Testament justice kind of thing, And now I understand that I don't need to kill another human being for justice to be served. I understand the need for vengeance. I understand the tremendous hurt and harm that's caused with murderers and serial rapists and all. I understand where that comes from. But I don't need to kill another human being for justice to be served. And I also understand how inequitable our justice system has been when it comes to the distribution, of the death penalty, how racially undiverse it has been and how many people are convicted wrongly. I changed my position. Oklahoma just voted to legalize medical marijuana. Oklahoma, wow. Of all places. Now, granted, the religious governor is having a heart attack over it. She's lost her mind over it. But I mean, I couldn't have imagined a time when I was voting pro-weed. And I was there on the day of the primaries. And I was like, you betcha, bring on the weed. Like, who cares? The idea of social programs to help the poor and disadvantaged. I'm all about that. Single-payer Obamacare or universal health care? You bet. I've had to change my position as an atheist and a humanist because I rejected this idea that God's going to appear any day and sweep everything up so we don't have to worry about the environment, and God will sort out the good from the evil, and that God wants us to be tough on people by killing them for crime and all these other things. I had to reverse everything I'd thought. I just think it's a natural progression for most people to look at the decisions we make in our world and realize that if you're going to be pro-humanity, you are going to lean. I think you're just going to lean more left. I know I'm going to take it in the teeth for that by the few conservatives.
Seth Andrews says all right-wingers are evil on the Godless Spellchecker podcast.
Andy's a Nazi. I mean, that's exactly what some people are going to do. But I mean, if I'm genuinely about human beings, I'm less tribal and more global. Well, that's going to be left. I'm not. I want to protect the church-state line. That's left. I want to see less law enforcement resources put into people, fighting people who were smoking weed and doing that. That's a left issue. I want to see a woman's right to choose what happens to her own body protected. That's left. Time and time again, I just find myself as a humanist and a rejecter of religion lining left. And I don't know if bringing more conservatives in is really the answer. I think let's define what our value systems are first, and then whatever political party you happen to align with, that comes after.
Yeah, I agree. That's a very thoughtful answer. I just think sometimes we can, well, as you were speaking about pods before, we can run the risk of becoming one large pod. And I think sometimes
I buy that.
If you have a few conservatives in your midst or right wingers, even if you're steadfast in your principles versus theirs, sometimes it helps to flex your muscles in terms of defending some of these things. Or maybe you've been arguing certain things ineffectively, or maybe you can take a sprinkle of truth from what they're saying and then strengthen your own position. I think that's healthy. But like I say, I think you're right. I think just a lot of the things that I stand for, or I think are tough principles, just seem to fall on the left. Strangely, I
take your point, though. I think you're right that, like, the way the social media algorithm works, the more of the type of news that speaks to me that I watch, the more of that type of news is fed into my threads, my news feed every day. And so I'm seeing more and more affirming information and less contradicting information. And I do think you're right. I think it's healthy. And I've made a commitment. Actually, I saw Faisal say something back to him. He said something about, I'm going to make a point to watch or listen to something from the camp of the political opposition at least once a day, I think, just so I know what's going on and just so I'm doing my due diligence to make sure that I'm not in a bubble. And I subscribe to the Fox News Facebook feed.
It's like, welcome back, Seth.
Oh,
good
God.
to see you.
Oh, God. Oh, God. It's physical pain. It caused me physical pain. But I think, if I'm going to live honestly, it doesn't mean I have to agree, but let's just find out what's happening. Let's hear the point of view. And without surrendering my values, at least I've been exposed to the other position.
Yeah, that's a good way to manage it. I've been doing the same. I subscribe to left-leaning political weekly magazines and conservative-leaning ones at the same time, and try and collide them and see if I can forge a little bit of truth in between. I've got a couple of questions from Twitter if you're happy to answer them.
At your disposal.
This is a great one, actually. Skeptic Perspective has asked, can we discuss the rise of the so-called IDW, that's the intellectual dark web, and how currently popular conservatives like Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson or Douglas Murray are swaying some people who oppose SJW culture to be more favourable towards Christian leanings in the West? It's an alarming trend. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? You have people like Sam Harris doing speaking tours. I know Matt Dillahunty's been on stage with them as well. People like Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro. I think he's an outspoken Jew, isn't he? Jordan Peterson, it's difficult to pin him down on what he actually believes. Douglas Murray is an atheist, but he's a proponent of sort of culturally Christian values. So I mean, this is new into the mix of atheism, isn't it? How do you navigate these things?
Well, as if I wasn't already hated enough, we have to talk about the IDW. That's nice. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. um, I, you know, I've had some fun online at Jordan Peterson's expense.
Yeah.
My first real introduction to Peterson was watching the debate video between him and my friend Matt Dillahunty.
Yeah, that was
and
great.
they were talking about, atheism, and Peterson essentially was asserting that Matt wasn't really an atheist because he's so good. And it's such an old argument, such a rudimentary, debunked arguments against atheism 101 kind of position. I literally had to do a double take. Like, did he really just say that? And then he goes into this word salad about why morality and goodness, you would leave the religious pinnings of these things at your own peril. And I found it hugely unimpressive. And I, on the grander stage, understand that there is a growing resistance to the social justice warriors who have taken a good idea and have totally fucked it up. I mean, I get that. Every culture, you will find good atheists, you'll find horrible atheists. You'll find good feminists, you'll find horrible feminists. You'll find good proponents of and advocates for social justice, and you'll find people who are they're just toxic. They're hurting. They're not helping. They're doing so much more damage than they ever would do good. They have created this weird culture where it's you can't do anything, you can't say anything, and they seem to be committed to either misunderstanding or misrepresenting. And I understand that there's a backlash against that. It's a natural thing. But the idea of the intellectual dark web, beyond its hugely pretentious name, but I don't understand what the qualifications would be to be a member of it. All right, wait, you got Sam Harris, who I don't think ever asked to. I think he just sort of they named him. You got Jordan Peterson's in there. Well, what the hell? Dave Rubin, I got nothing personal against Dave Rubin. I would love the chance to sit down and have a conversation with Dave Rubin, but I think he uses some amazingly, alarmingly lazy terminology when speaking about the left and political issues. And it just seems like a free-for-all. And so I support a natural sort of a blanching against extremist positions and people, which is, it's natural for us to say enough. All right. But the intellectual dark web for me is kind of a punchline. It's difficult for me to take it seriously. Anyway, that's where I fall.
It does feel like a reaction to the mainstream discourse, doesn't it? And whether it's a good reaction or a bad reaction, I think a reaction was inevitable. So we'll have to see where that leads. One last question from a gentleman called Zvonimir Bricalo. I'll be amazed if I've pronounced that right. He's asked, what's the difference between being an atheist in Britain and the US? Well, it's the insults, isn't it? It's the insults.
Well, I mean, I think you said that if you walk down the street and you ask somebody about their religion, they look at you kind of funny, right?
Yeah.
It's really a personal thing. In my part of the world, they ask you 3 questions when you meet them. Hi, what's your name? What do you do for a living? And where do you go to church? These are, in Oklahoma especially, it's so woven into your culture. You look at someone's social media feeds. I have some dear friends. Their social media feed has been filled recently with baptism pictures of their young child at church camp, summer camp. But this is the cultural language that people speak. Being an atheist, in this country, there was a recent article that had been published. I'll take it with a grain of salt because it came out in the Huffington Post, but it said, I think it was a quarter of Americans that were part of the survey said that they didn't think that the U.S. Constitution applied to atheists.
Wow. So you can't be American and an atheist. There it is.
This is the narrative. If you live in a God and country culture, then you have all of these theocrat politicians who are pounding on their Bibles, whether they genuinely believe or not, whether they're pandering to their base or not. They're essentially claiming that, well, this country belongs to me and my religion. And therefore, those who don't hold to that deity, well, they're less American. They're less patriotic. They love their country less. They They are less protected by this country's founding documents. I use the word atheist as often as I can in this culture because I think it's healthy for people to hear it. I think that more and more we're seeing it start to become normalized. That's a good thing to see. We're seeing the rise of the nuns or the non-religious 30 and unders are leaving the church in droves in the United States, which is really, and it's encouraging and a little scary for a couple of reasons. It's encouraging because they don't need church. They're walking away from the edicts of their Bible, and they don't want to be, bigots against LGBTQ people, and they don't want to take away the rights of women to choose what happens to their own body. And they do care about people who live in other parts of the world, and they see the global condition and humanity, and they want to help. And so they're not fundamentalists. They may not be atheists, but they're non-religious. They're not plugged into church. The scary part about that is I worry a little bit because religion doesn't speak directly to their lives, that they may not see the urgency of remaining vigilant against the steamroller, the well-funded steamroller of religious institutions. So the minute these kids sort of opt out and say, it doesn't really matter to me, well, that's whenever the fox comes into the hen house and you've got calamity once again on your hands. And especially in the Trumposphere, I think we need the 30 and unders to engage as much or more than ever. And so everywhere I go, I try to encourage everybody, be out, be proud, be as big of atheist or humanist or whatever you are, and be about human beings, and be about your values at the highest volume that you can. And it's my hope that this nation will come to its senses, and then we'll put Trump in the history books and learn from this tremendous mistake, and commit our future to being about better things and better people.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I mean, I suppose one of the most striking differences, which I cannot imagine happening in the States politically in any context, was when Tony Blair was our Prime Minister, and he's a devout Catholic, but kept that quite close to his chest while he was in office. And in fact, he was actually asked about religion once, and his spin doctor, Alistair Campbell, who's one of his senior advisors, responded with, "We don't do God." That was his answer to questions about religion. We don't do God, and wow. that was seemed quite reasonable to many. And there wasn't. I mean, there was a lot of reporting about it, but it didn't seem particularly egregious. And if I was to juxtapose that into the American political system and have somebody say that in charge, I think that'd be political suicide, wouldn't it?
Yeah, they'd circle his house with torches. Somebody asked me, Stephen. They said, "Do you think we'll ever have an atheist president?" And I'm like, we've had. Yeah. Like statistically, it's impossible that we haven't had an atheist president. They were just politically savvy enough not to tell anybody that they were actually an atheist. Now, it's my hope in my lifetime we will see an openly atheist president in the United States, and we'll see a cultural acceptance of this president as a human being first, and the label of religious or non-religious that could come later.
Okay, Seth. Well, this has been a really easy hour, so much in fact that I completely took my eye off the clock, but I've really enjoyed speaking to you. You've been very candid. I mean, increasingly jealous of your radio voice.
Oh, you're very kind. Well, it's all done with machines. I sound like Jerry Lewis in real life, so it's a real honor. I appreciate you. It's funny, I've been aware of your work ever since I saw the clip of you on television. I forget the name of the show, though. Forgive me. BBC Big Questions, I think, maybe. Yeah, Big Questions. And then it was after you did a really thorough expose of Werleman's.
Oh, yes.
Book, and I was mentioned in that book as favorably when it came out. Seth's one of the good guys out there.
You came out well.
And then he proceeded to essentially misrepresent the entire fucking movement. It was unbelievable. And I had to go public and write it like a 3,500 word response to say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. But I appreciated that you were so thorough. So I followed your work, and I'm an admirer. I appreciate what you do and how you do it. And it's been a real honor to be a part of the show today. So thanks for the invite, my friend.
Oh, cheers, Seth. The pleasure has been all mine. Is there anything you'd like to point people towards before I let you get back to your afternoon?
I host a radio show and website called The Thinking Atheist. I always like to tell everybody, I am not the thinking atheist. I'm the guy who took 30 years to figure out that human beings could not live to be 900 years old, okay? In the world of people like Steven Pinker and these great minds, I'm not the thinking atheist. I come from a faith culture where we fake it till we make it. Just take it on faith, go with the flow. And as a rationalist, I reject that. And so the Thinking Atheist is a reminder to me and everybody, let's not take it on faith. Let's go think about the challenges and opportunities before us. So you can find that work at thethinkingatheist.com. And then on a more personal note, if you want to find out more about me, my website is sethandrews.net. And thanks again.
Beautiful. Thanks, Seth.
It's a real honor.
Thank you very much for listening. I've not read out the names of my Patreon supporters for a while because I'm shit, basically, so I'm going to make more of an effort to make sure I do that more frequently. So I'm just going to reel off a number of names as a very small thank you for supporting me. It really makes a difference. It's enabled me to get some audio and visual equipment to increase the sound quality of the podcast. It's helped me travel to events. It's helped me buy scotch. So thank you. But no, seriously, podcasts, it's one of them things that I think we all consume to an extent, or we all appreciate in some way, but it's just one of those things where, because it's internet based, no one wants to pay for it, which I understand. It's just the culture. So I just really recommend, if you enjoy some content on the internet and it's somebody who's not got some big corporate backing or gets a wage, who's just doing this out of their spare time and their passions for the issue, just please consider chipping in. I'm not talking specifically about me, although that'd be nice. Patreon.com/gspellchecker. But people in general, it really makes a huge difference if you say, I really appreciate the content you're putting out. I get a little bit of value from it, and here's $1 a month. And if everyone who consumes this content can do that here and there, it really helps sustain these people who are producing the things you like. It enables them to do more of it. I mean, there's a possibility, my audience certainly justifies it, that maybe one day, if enough people support it in this way, could pack in the day job, just become a full-time reporter in a sense, do more traveling, interview more people, report on more things, produce more content because I'm not spending 8 hours a day at desk in my day job. So that's the dream. So if you feel like you get a bit of value out of my content, please consider chipping in a little bit, like these kind folks that I'm about to say thank you to. So I'm going to do my best with the pronunciation of a lot of these names. If I butcher your name, I apologise in advance. Feel free to send me an angry tweet. But here we go. Big thank you to the following people: Jonathan Waters, John Lee, Declan Shalvey, Matt Tanner, Brad Stroud, Dylan J. Herschel, Dylan's collecting all the names, Todd Erickson, Chris Igaz, Jason, no surname for Jason, he's just Jason, that's how important Jason is, doesn't even need a surname, Haim Haravan, Michael Dolinsky, Dan Thomas, Dan's so cool he's got 2 first names, Joshua Sherwood, Dogan Techben. Now, I'm just going to point out at this point, if any of these are anagrams that form another embarrassing word, and I'm unaware of this, I will hunt you down, I will find you, and I will have my revenge. Okay. Kate Range. Thank you, Kate. Will Payton. Mario. No surname, just Mario. Terry Heffelfinger. Thanks, Terry. Simon. No surname. Gillian Kirkpatrick. Andrew Ellis. Stuart MacDonald, HS, just the initials there for HS, Harvey Smythe, that's what I'm going with, Harvey Smythe, Hugh Wilbraham, thanks Hugh, CC, initials again. Now, more initials, this is either AI or AL, or might just be Al, could be Al, who knows, but thank you. Okay, somebody called Lady Liberty with a boner. I think we just take a moment to reflect on that. Are we good? Alright. Stephen Redford. David Sanders. Mark Ruddo. Diane Coughlin. Bond. Levi Bond. Ludwig Rahl. Doug Forsyth. James Gross. Or Gross. I'm going to go with Gross, Jimmy. We'll call you Jimmy Gross. Sophia Lloyd. Martin Finden. Gabrielle Bernardes, Jamie White, and last but certainly not least, Murray Webber. Thank you, you wonderful primates, for supporting the podcast and showing your appreciation for all the hours I put in editing and slaving over a laptop. It's very much appreciated. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so at patreon.com/gspellchecker, and I'll do my best to give you a shout out on the show, and you'll have access to episodes slightly earlier than the, should we call them peasants? No, that's not kind, is it? The non-supporters of the podcast, the common folk, you know what I mean, the riffraff. So thank you very much once again. I think we've all learned something here today.